Okay, thank you everybody who is here and ready to begin our ECBO training session 3. Previous meetings, we discussed grant writing 101, and today we're going to be talking about budgeting and reporting, specifically data and outcomes. We are going to be together potentially for the next couple of hours. So please make yourselves comfortable. Feel free to move around as you need to keep your mind engaged. And we appreciate you making time to do this at the end of the work week and the end of the work day. I know that we've reached a point where mentally we'd like to just be able to hit that off switch and move on to other things that maybe are a little more um, pleasurable. But so with that, really do appreciate you being here. My name is Travis White. I am the Assistant Director at Kentucky Office for Refugees, and I will be presenting information during the second half of this training session. And I'm going to ask Sedrick to go ahead and introduce himself, and then we'll have Debra introduce herself. Debra is a guest presenter with us today. And so with that, Sedrick, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Travis. This has been great and tremendous progress on this training program. Yeah, my name is Sedrick. I'm the Kentucky Office for Refugees consultant on ethnic community-based organizations engagement. And yeah, I'm here and I'm excited to be a part of these trainings, but also all this process about ECBO engagement in Kentucky through Kentucky Office for Refugees. Thank you.
All right, I'm Debra Peffer. I am the Senior Grant Accountant Analysis for CORE Office, Kentucky Office of Refugee. And I'm going to present on how budgeting works for our 2025 year. And this is to give you all an idea of what we are looking for in a budget and what kind of information you need to gather for your budget. And I'm also going to be inside the presentation, I'm going to explain to you where you can get some guidelines on what is allowable in a federal award and things like that. Are you ready for me to start, Travis? Oh, you're muted. Travis, you're muted. He's talking, but he's muted.
I like to see those lips sticking like that. Travis, you're muted.
Thanks for that. I was just saying, I actually should share a couple slides real quick just to give people the format for today and when they'll be able to ask some questions. So, Debra, if you can pass the host back to me real quick.
Yeah.
And then I'm
not very familiar with Teams, so
okay.
I mean with
you got to find my name, click the 3 dots next to it, and
okay,
then
on the participant. Okay, gotcha. There you go.
Okay, and sorry everybody for the technical difficulties. And looks like I'm sharing. All right, so like I had said, today we're talking about budgeting and reporting, and this is our third session. Here's the agenda. So Debra is going to be talking about budgeting basics for core grants. When she has completed her presentation, we'll take some time for Q&R. Debra, you can tell folks if you would prefer that they raise their hand while you're speaking to ask questions when you're on particular information that they have a question about, or if you would prefer to have them hold their questions for the end. Once we've concluded with the budgeting section, I will take over to talk about reporting basics for core grants, and we'll have a Q&R at the end of that. And then at the end of our meeting today, we'll talk about upcoming dates for in-person training that will be happening in Lexington, Louisville, and Bowling Green during the month of August. And so that was it. I can pass it back to you now. Did I even share that with you all?
No, I didn't see anything on my end.
Okay.
Now you're
Here
sharing.
you go. Here's the agenda. So Debra's going to go over budgeting basics. We'll have a Q&R time, and then I'll take over for reporting. and do a Q&R for that before we talk about dates. See if I can get a handle on this now. And Debra, you are the host, so go ahead and tell us what we need to know about budgeting.
Get to my share screen here. All right, can you all see my screen?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. Yeah. Hold on a minute. I told it to share, but it just didn't. Oh, there you go.
You have to click. There you go.
There we go. Nope, you're seeing the wrong screen. Hold on a minute. There we go. Can you all see the presentation here?
We can. Thank you.
All right. So I would like to hold questions until the end because I feel like you might have a question at that moment, and then there's so many slides that I probably will answer it at some point in the near future. So if we can just hold questions to the end, that would be a little bit helpful. And I might stop and ask if anybody has a question in between a few slides, but we'll get to it when we get there. All right, I just want to introduce our accounting staff to everyone. So in the core accounting finance team, we have myself, Debra Peffer, and I'm the senior grant accounting analysis. And then we have Malini, and Malini is a senior grant accountant as well. And then we have David, who is also a senior grant accountant. And this is our emails, our phone numbers, and our extensions. And there's our pictures, so you all know what we look like. Okay, so I want to share this information with everyone because I think this is really important information. The Code of Federal Regulations, and specifically Subpart E, that is what tells you on the federal side of the world what is allowable to bill to your federal grants. And this is a very helpful link to have, and I have it in here, and I can share this PowerPoint with Travis once we get done, and he can email it out to everyone. But inside of these federal guidelines, you'll find pretty much everything that you're thinking about billing to a federal grant. And it has a really helpful table of contents that you can get around. The three things that when you're looking at federal expenditures is you want to make sure that it's equitable, allowable, and reasonable. So it has to be all three things. So if although things are allowed in a federal grant, doesn't mean it's reasonable, and it doesn't mean that it applies to your program. So for instance, if you are a program that services children and you want to give them a tablet at the end of the program for participating in the program, that isn't allowable because they're ending the program. But if you wanted to give those children a tablet potentially to use while they're in the program, then that's allowable because they were using it during the program times. So you just have to know what is allowable and reasonable. And that's where our core finance team and our core program managers can help you in that. But whenever you're looking at a citation from a federal guideline, you'll see it will say 2 CFR 200.XX. So there's always going to be 200.3 numbers behind it. And that's telling you what federal regulation it is coming from. Okay, so in the core program, we have 2 documents that we ask our grantees to complete when they're doing their budgeting. We have the budget line item workbook, which is an Excel workbook. And this is basically gives you the clean version of all the expenses in more of a accounting formatting. And then we have the budget narrative, which is a Word document that gives you the information behind those numbers. So on the spreadsheet, you're basically just giving numbers. And then on the budget narrative, you'll be giving the information behind the numbers. And I'm going to go over both of these documents in the next slides. So your budget narrative workbook. So the budget narrative workbook is going to be the first part of it, and then we're going to go over the narrative. I do recommend whenever you're completing these type of information that you have both of these open and you're doing them simultaneously when you're completing them. So if you're filling out your personnel on your Excel workbook, you would want to fill it out on your Word document so you can get all the information together at the same time. So I'm going to pull up the budget item workbook. So give me just a second. I'm going to stop this and I'm going to pull up the Excel sheet because the Excel sheet is too hard to put into a PowerPoint. Okay, so this is what we call the budget line item workbook. And inside this budget line item workbook, you'll see that we have several tabs. And I'm not going to go into depth on these tabs because I'm just here to tell you what you need for budgeting. I'm not here to tell you how to fill this out today. But this main tab right here, which is the line item workbook, this looks very similar to a financial statement. So it's reporting out the information that you're wanting to put in. So you have like your fringe and personnel and fringe benefits at the top. You have travel and conference for out of state. And it goes down from there with all the different categories you can have in a grant. These same categories are in the budget narrative. And I'm going to go into depth on these categories back on the PowerPoint here in just a minute on what all these information means. Then in addition to that, we have the personnel and fringe workbook itself. So inside of here, this is like where you would list out your employees' names and their job titles, how many hours they work a week, how many weeks they work in a year, and their hourly rate. And then there's all kinds of columns that will calculate up how that percentage works into your grants. And then you also have, if you employ your employees, pay for health care benefits or any kind of benefits for your employees. If the employee is going to be traveling, and then their cell phones. This is a pretty lengthy document, and I don't want to go through it in detail too much, but it looks very overwhelming, but it's not as hard as it looks. It's just a lot of information to put in one place. All right, let me minimize this and bring back up the PowerPoint. So I just went through all this with the 5 tabs that are in the budget line item workbook. So now we're going to talk about the budget narrative. The information is basically the same for both. It says in the budget narrative, I'm going to get into the details of what they are. So inside of a budget narrative, it says a Word document. At the top of the Word document, you'll have your grant name. So what type of grant you're receiving. You'll have the period of the grant that you're receiving it in, and then the name of your organization that you're having it for. So in an example here, I have Refugee School Impact, which is one of the grants that CORE offers, and then the grant year. And then I made up an organization called Savannah School. So inside of the narrative, you have 7 sections that you fill out for the narrative. You have personnel and fringe benefits. You have travel and conference, which is for out-of-state travels and conferences, not for in-state. That's in a different category. You have materials and supplies, language services, pertaining cost, and indirect cost. Oh, I say my internet connection's unstable, so bear with me on that. Okay, so and your personnel and fringe. So inside this section, you'll be listing the name, title, the FTE of that individual into your program, and the salary amount that they are billed. For federal guidelines on personnel and fringe, you would go to 2 CFR 200-430. And inside of there, it tells you what you can and cannot bill for personnel and fringe and what type of personnel, how you bill their personnel. If you need to know how to do EFTs, which is full-time employee equivalency, we have a presentation on that, and I can also give that to Travis if you all want to see that. For your fringe benefits, you put your employee's name, their title, what if they're getting medical, dental, vision, or other fringe benefit amounts. And when you're putting in the fringe benefit amounts, it's for the employer amount only. So it's not the total amount you're paying for health insurance. So if you're paying $500 and your employee's paying $300 a month for a total of $800, you're only going to charge the federal award $500 because you can only charge for the percentage that your company is paying. Your employee is paying their percentage of it. And then for federal guidelines on that, you can go to 2 CFR 200-431. So out of state travel and conferences. This doesn't always apply to everybody because not everybody has out of state travel. But in this section, you would detail that where you're going to be traveling during your grant award period, that you're going to be charging the grant for those costs. You would need to put the name of the conference, the location of the conference, so city and state, the number of days that the person's going to be traveling, who's attending, and then you have the amount for the airfare, the lodging, ground travel, meal per diem, and other costs. And then we want to note here that conference registration fees are not in this area. It's actually going to go underneath of staff development, which is located underneath the other section. And so you would pay for all of the cost of getting to there, the hotel and everything like that, but the actual registration fee for that conference would go underneath of other. And then for guidelines on this, you can go to 200 or 2 CFR 200 432, 200 438, 200 430, 475. So there's several guidelines on travel and conferences for federal awards. So material and supplies. So in this section, you would list material and supplies that's for the program. So this would be like paper or some kind of binder or anything you're needing for your program to operate. And this would also be if you were getting, for instance, tablets for students to use in the program, but they're not going to be taking those tablets home, like they're for program use only, and that the participant won't be keeping them in the future. They would go underneath of material and supplies. If the participant was keeping it for a future use, then that would go underneath of client participation cost, which is at the end of the narrative, and we'll go over that shortly. But this is also where you would put any materials you're buying from your employees, or if they're getting a computer equipment or anything in that nature. And for guidelines on that, you can go to 2 CFR 200-453. Okay, language service access. So for language service access, you would put you would put in here for interpreters or translation. So if you are going to if you would need to put in for budgeting for an interpreter for your program, and you would have a professional contract with somebody to do that, like a third-party service, or if you're going to have some type of translation service that you're paying for, that would be going here into this section. And for guidelines here, this guideline that I have listed is actually for professional services. So it's 2 CFR 200-459, and that is this to tell you how you handle professional service contracts with third-party vendors. Other expenses. So this section is pretty large. Before I get into other expenses, is there any questions on what I've talked about so far? If so, you can see if I can. I don't think it's going to let me see you all completely. Anybody got any questions? I don't see any hands.
No, but
Nobody
I just
muting
wanted to
themselves.
offer folks, if you don't know if you can remember your question the whole time while she's sharing this information, go ahead and put it in the chat. And when we get to the Q&R, we'll go back and look at those questions.
Okay. Well, since nobody's stopping me at the moment, I'm going to continue on. So this is a large section, and this is where you would put most of your expenses that don't fall underneath of the expenses we just talked about and that are not client related, not client specific expenses, and they're not included into your indirect cost rate, which most small organizations don't have indirect cost rates. If you do have an indirect cost rate, we can always talk about that. Once again, you want to remember when you're filling out this section that you're putting things that are applicable, allowable, and reasonable. So you have to follow those 3 golden rules when you're trying to put expenses into your budgets. So the very first category in other expenses is meeting and conferences. So these are for your local meetings and your local conferences. And so this is like if you're like, for instance, this meeting that Travis is having with you all today would go into this category if you were having this in person versus virtually. So if Travis had to occur any expenses for this meeting, he would put it in this category here, and list it as ECBO meeting and have a cost there. This is also where you would put any of the, if you had to rent a space for it, or if you had to buy refreshments or snacks for the meeting because you're having it during a lunch period and things like that. So they would go underneath this section, and there's several guidelines about this. There's 200 or 2 CFR 200-421, 200-423, 200-432, and 400-438. Now, please note in here, one of these, and I'm not sure which number it is. One of them refers to entertainment. So this does not, when you're having meetings, if you say you're going to have a staff Christmas party, that's not considered a federal award meeting. Because if you're not discussing business and you just took everybody out to lunch for Christmas because it was Christmas time or holiday time, that's considered entertainment. And so that is not billable to a federal award. So you have to be very careful when you're purchasing food or purchasing stuff that it is related to a business topic, and you can show some type of agenda to tie back to that information. So it's very crucial that you, like Travis would keep the agenda from today to tie back if he was to have this in person and have refreshments at it. Okay, other expenses, we have, and you want to make sure that none of these expenses, if you do have an indirect cost, are included in your indirect cost rate. Maintenance and repairs. So this is if you own a building and you're charging us you own a building and you're going to charge us maintenance and repairs for it. Somebody's asking to record. I think we're already recording this information.
Go ahead and decline that. And for
Okay.
everybody's benefit, we are recording and we'll share the recording after the meeting.
So then this would also include maintenance and repairs on vehicles if you're charging us for a company vehicle that you're having in your program. And for guidelines on that, there is the listing for the guidelines. You can also charge us for your telephone and internet service that's related to the program. So you want to make sure that you're keeping an allocation. So if you have more than one program and you're funded by more than one person, you have to make sure you're allocating the proper amount to us. Same thing for your gas and electric bills. And there's federal guidelines for that. So this is depreciation, which kind of goes with the maintenance and repairs. So if you own the building that you're in and you have a depreciation schedule, then you can charge us depreciation here. If you're leasing a copier and you have a contract with your copier, you can charge us for the copier. And then we have professional services. So this is any other third-party contract you have to perform your service that isn't related to language services. So if, for instance, Sedrick is a contractor with CORE. So in our grants, Sedrick is listed underneath this category. So for his services that he provides to you all for this training, he goes in this category. But once again, there's the federal regulations for professional services. And pretty much anything that isn't language services would go in this category. So also if, for instance, if you have a cleaning crew that comes in and cleans your office building and you want to charge us a percentage of that, that can go here. You just have to make sure you keep your contracts for those people. So once again, if you own a vehicle, I'm sorry, this is employee mileage. Sorry, employee mileage. So if your employees are traveling and they're getting reimbursed for their mileage on their vehicles, this is where it would go. So this is employee mileage only, not for the vehicle that you own. So if this is for the employees, and you want to make sure that you're paying your employees the federal rate if possible. And the current federal rate is 0.67 cents right now. And if you need to know that information, if you simply just type in onto Google federal reimbursement mileage rate, it will show you the dollar amount. It changes every year, usually around January. So you would want to make sure you look that up at the beginning of the year. Staff development. So this is where those registration fees for those conferences that we were just talking about, that's where this would go. This is also if you have a staff member who's taking a specific training related to your program. This is where it would go as well. Say, like for instance, in core, we take management concept classes to help us better understand federal regulations. And so this is where we would charge that information or charge that class in the section here. Employee health and welfare cost. This is for other health and welfare that you're doing for your employees that is not dental, vision, or health. So like, for instance, if you have a counseling service that you offer to your employees for counseling, this is where that would go. And the federal regulation for that is 2 CFR 200-437. Employee cell phones reimbursement. So if you reimburse your employee for their cell phone, this is you would put it underneath the other category as well. This is if you don't own your building, but you lease your building. So if you're paying $1,000 a month in rent for your building, you can charge us for leasing for your building. Now keep in mind, if that building is if you have more than one program and not all your programs are funded by the federal grants, you can't charge the whole leasing amount to us. You have to charge us whatever that program is occupying in the space. So you would have to do some type of allocation based on space in the building. And then you also can be charging us for leasing equipment. So say you can't you don't want to buy a vehicle, but you want to lease a vehicle, you can charge us for the monthly leasing on that vehicle that's related to your program, in addition to charging us for the mileage for that, which we have a transportation policy that CORE has developed this year, and we can also share that along with this presentation too. All right. As I said, other section is pretty large. So right here is membership and membership fees. So if you had, for instance, if you have a Zoom account for setting up Zoom meetings, then you would charge it here. If you have a prescription for Adobe or something in that nature, you would charge it here. Now you have to be careful about charging membership fees here if it has anything to do with political the words Travis, you might need to help me out here. The words escaping me here.
Lobbying.
Lobbying, thank you. If it has to do with lobbying, if it's a membership for any program, any membership that is connected to lobbying, you cannot charge it to a federal award. So you need to be careful to not charge any memberships to those programs here. Auditing services. So auditing services, you would charge it to the other grant. And we in CORE we would like for all of our grantees to have auditing done. Now that is and with small organization that could be very taxing and be hard for you to pay for on your own, and we understand that. So you can charge us the percentage that occurs to the grant for your programming and auditing. And it's not the big audit. It's not a single audit like most people think. You only have to have a single audit if you are receiving more than $1 million in federal funds. And if you are receiving more than $1 million in federal funds, you're not worried about this section because you've already been doing this for a long time, hopefully, because you're supposed to. If you're receiving less than that, then you would just get an independent audit, which is not the same scale as a single audit. And you would get, they basically come in and they make sure that you're following GAAP rules and make sure that you're following standard accounting practices and have controls in place. And then other expenses. So this is the catch-all. If it didn't fall underneath of all those things that I just said, it can fall in this one last spot, which is other. You just need to make sure that it's a billable cost to a federal award. All right, we're almost done, folks, I promise. So the last section I'm going to talk about is client services and client participation costs. So this section is stuff that is related specifically to clients. If you need guidelines on participation costs, is 2 CFR 200-456 in the federal guidelines. And that would tell you what they consider to be participation costs. Because all those other costs we just talked about and other, yes, they help the program run, but those are more administration costs. They're not specific to a client. This is more specific to a client. And once again, we want to remember those 3 words. Is it allocable, allowable, and reasonable? All right, so this is where your transportation would come in. So that vehicle that you're charging us leasing on, or you're charging us depreciation on, this is where your mileage would go for that vehicle. So you can charge that 60 cents a mile to core for that vehicle, in addition to getting the depreciation and or leasing for the vehicle. Or if you need to hire a third party to do your services, like Miller Bus Transportation for a field trip or for anything in that nature, you would charge it here in the participation costs. Scholarships. This only applies really to people who are doing school related stuff. But this is if you have any type of scholarships that you're paying or getting for your clients or participation or participants. Recredentialing, same thing. Education and training materials. So this is if you say you're going to buy a book or any kind of educational documents for your participants. This is where you would charge it. And this is if the participant is getting to keep the material. So if you you want to buy a book like I guess Spanish to English dictionary or something, that's where this would go. And because if you were giving the dictionary to the client to keep for their references, then that would go here. If you were buying that dictionary and you as a program were going to keep that book and not let the client take it home and keep it forever, then you put that underneath of materials and supplies. So that's where that's the distinction between those two. Oops, hold on just a second here. I skipped over. Client assistance. So this is if you're doing any kind of client assistance, emergency housing, or food assistance or anything like that, that would go in this category. Field trips. This is mainly for this would be the cost you're incurring for the field trip. So if you're going to take everybody to, I don't know, the history museum and you got to pay admissions for everybody, that's where this would go. The transportation for that field trip would go on for transportation, but the rest of it would go here. Participant cost. This is basically a catch-all of what it doesn't fall in the rest of those. And then other, which is basically the same thing at this point. All right. And that is my whole spiel. So I'm going to stop sharing so I can see everybody's little boxes. And I'm going to pass the host back to Travis. But does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, while we're getting to question, I want to give some few clarifications. Some of the links are going to be shared just in case you wonder or you want to ask about that. And also during the in-person meetings or meeting with your grant coordinators, they can also clarify some of this stuff. But in terms of general presentation that has been presented to you, if you have like any type of allocation, any type of things that you didn't understand very well, this is your time to check on Debra and asking about that. The way we do it, you can put your hands up, click on your, I think your name, and then there is a hand, or if not, or you can ask your question writing on a comment link on a chat, and then we'll go from there. So we're gonna give you guys some few minutes to ask questions. Again, knowing that the templates are gonna be shared to you guys. Those will be ready for the application.
And for anybody who is a current grantee for with us, we are going to have this training again. We're going to have a digital training again next week. And then we're going to have an in-person training as well that we're offering. And then closer to when you're submitting your grant or your actual grant information, we're going to have a drop-in 3-hour time frame where the finance team is going to be available for you all to drop in and ask questions.
That's good. Anyone?
I knew I threw a lot of information at everybody,
Mhm.
but I was trying to get in my time frame there that I was given.
Oh, you're
Yeah,
good.
you did good. Does
Yeah.
anybody have just general budget questions about, um, types of program expenses? There's always, Deborah mentioned several times, allocable, allowable, reasonable. We wouldn't be able to assess any specific scenarios for those kinds of things, but we could give you a general idea of whether a similar type of expense would be something that would fall under one of our grants if you have.
I mean, that being said, I would love to ask Elisha if he's here from Arafiki. I know they've been going through this process just recently.
Mhm.
And if maybe he can tell us a little bit in terms of practicality, because some of this for people who never, sometimes get this budget thing can be a little bit. Elisha, are you here?
I'm right here.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. So I was asking, like, is there any type of tips would you like to provide in terms of your most recent experience on core grants, based on what Debra said, just quickly on some of the things maybe you overlooked that you think that is needed as a ECBO, based on your organization?
Yes, I think Deborah, that was a very, a lot of information. And I know like a lot of ACBUs, this will not make sense until you have the paper on your hands and you're filling everything in to actually make sense of every item. But I have few points that I wanna just bring your attention. One of them, I think when you move from being a ACBU or like a voluntary, volunteering based services. And when you're looking for core where you can pay salaries, I want you to check for competitive wave in wages in your area, because if Starbucks is paying $16 and you ask somebody to get $10 or $15 to have a lot of work they're doing just because they've been doing volunteering, it won't, you know it's not competitive, and it will not help your organization a long time, because it's just you're not going to get the quality of work. Especially they want their time to be worth it. So be very competitive rate for what you pay in your salary, and then evaluate your payments. If you want to pay yourself or your staff, just evaluate the payments in your state, what that look like. Because I think core will not tell you what to pay your people or how much they should earn, but you have to evaluate and see what your needs are, what qualification, all that stuff, so you can put in those. The other thing is making sure you have the real cost of stuff. I think right now we also learning this, because when you're doing budget, like the real cost of things. When we budget for like food or catering, you can do an estimation, but just do more research so you know exactly how much it will cost. Because we found out very quick, those can add up. And if you just think on top of the head, it's not that simple. And the
Those
other
are great.
thing,
Those are great tips there. Yeah.
yeah, and the other thing, you mentioned about benefits, you
Mhm.
know. Please do your research and look at your benefits, and see what core is allowed and what it can do, the percentage, and be mindful of that. Um, Also, core can cover liability, insurance, things like that. So just as a small or non-profit where you're trying to get from like um no budget, or whatever you get, that's what you use to actually put things in the budget that makes sense and that works for your organization. do a lot of research and don't be shy to ask call and sit with them. Just please, there is a line item for almost everything, that can work for you. And if it's not there, they will tell you where, it doesn't exist or it's not in what we do or it doesn't align, with the federal funding. But please sit down and talk and just go through them, listen, ask questions. So when it start making sense and you're going through the application, save your time, talk to Travis or somebody in call, that can help you make sure those details match. And also do your research,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. To add to your salary discussion there, you also want to include FICA, which is something that a lot of people don't remember to include when they're looking at salaries.
Mhm.
So, and most people who don't do payroll don't know what FICA is. So FICA is your federal tax rate. So, which is FICA. See, everybody wants to know how to spell FICA if you want to Google it. And FICA is 0.0765%.
Mhm.
So, and I can put that in the chat so you all are like not having to do a bunch of math real quick. But you want to make sure that you add that to, and the budget workbook does that for you. FICA is included in there as one of the benefits. But that's also something you need to take in mind. So if you're offering somebody $15 an hour, then you need to add in that FICA on top of that $15 an hour. So you'd have to take 1.0765 and times it by 15, and that would get your true hourly rate to that person
Mhm.
that you're going to be paying for that person, even if they don't take any other benefits.
Yeah.
So in federal awards, you have two different rates. You have the person's rate that they're getting paid, and then you have what we call the loaded rate. So your loaded rate is going to be different than their pay rate. So if they're making $15 an hour, but then their loaded rate would have their FICA and any health insurance or anything else like that included to it. And that's actually their actual rate. So they might start off, yeah, it's $15 an hour that employee's getting on their end, but on the employer side, that employee is actually going to cost maybe $20 an hour once you add in FICA and health insurance and vision and all the other retirement and whatever else you want to offer somebody. So you have to keep that in mind as well. So when you're doing budgeting, that's also a good key to have. Okay. Sorry, I was reading the chat to make sure it wasn't a question.
No.
But those are very good tips that you shared. I'm really glad you shared those.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the other thing I would mention briefly, like if you have if it's a benefit or insurance local provider, talk to them, and just get an idea of things. Because I think when you don't have accurate, cost of things, and then you wanna do it actual when you already got budgets, and let me just hire maybe the benefit provider that can go through the system, and you didn't put the actual costs, it just. So just talk to them before and just have an understanding of all those, numbers so you can work for your organization.
Yeah, I think one of the most important thing I'll have to stress, based on my experience everywhere, especially for organizations or communities that haven't got money or grants before, they're trying to be a little bit how do you say, they're trying to be a little bit conservative because they feel like, if we do this, maybe this is this, or things come out of your head. And I think one of the things that both Debra and Elisha mentioned is the idea of doing your research. If you know you're doing any type of contractors or outside contractors, make sure you check at least on a three. Just this is my personal recommendation. Make sure you check at least on a three service providers. Those three service providers, you'll know exactly what's the price, and when you get the grant, you will have at least accurate numbers that you're looking for. And then therefore you don't have to, because I've seen a lot of times people just put things on their head, and once everything is already there, money is in the bank, and then you realize that this is actually lower than we thought. So what are you gonna do? Some organization, as we say, this training you know, it will work for all your grant writing, budget writing, and many places you are applying for grants. Some places just like once and they can't go back. They don't give you time to do this. It's up to you to figure out, and that becomes a lot of stress in that position. So research is something I want to press on. Yes, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead, Travis.
Okay, sure. So I'm going to actually share what's becoming a familiar document by now, which is the sample application that was created to talk specifically about this proposal infrastructure section. There will be something like this in the funding opportunity application. And what this section is all about is helping you as an agency or a nonprofit organization think about all of the different things that go into doing the work that you're planning to do. And it's broken down step by step. So it asks you to think, first of all, what is the service or what is the action that you're going to take or that your participants in your program are going to take? Then, who are the staff or the volunteers that are providing that service? And you want to list those people because later on, you're going to be asking who's paying for that. And so you're going to use this document to list all of the different things that might become expenses that the grant needs to pay for, including staff salaries. The fourth question is list all the resources needed to provide this intervention to the number of people that you intend to serve. So that might be, for example, we're going to be providing childcare to 15 children of the participants in our employment services program. While they're receiving employment training and coaching and all these things, we're going to provide childcare. Well, list all of the resources that are going to go into providing that childcare. You need to, in addition to staff, you need space, you need supplies, you might need diapers and wipes and disinfecting. You list everything because then the next question or over here is going to be who's paying for that? Is it going to be core, which if it's a program expense, you can definitely and you should include that in your application. If it's another resource that you have outside of core funds, then you can list that on there and say, okay, somebody else is paying for that. But when you put your budget together, you go back and you refer to this and you say, does my budget include all of the different things that I'm asking core to pay for? Not only the cost, which I put on the line item budget, but then is it listed and is it explained in the budget narrative? So here again, you'll list one service that you're providing and you'll go through all those questions. Another service that you're providing to those same clients, go through all those questions. You can list a whole bunch of different services and answer the question of who's doing the work, what are the resources that are needed, who's paying or providing those resources, and use this as a way of thinking through what Elisha was talking about, thinking about all of the different elements, doing your research, figuring out what the actual costs are, and just being very careful not to forget anything that might be vital to the success of your program. We would hate for something to have been excluded, like leasing space for your childcare program, and you find out that you don't have a space to do this, but you thought about everything else, and we say, well, it wasn't included in your budget, so you can't necessarily do that. We do allow for budget amendments and award adjustments under certain circumstances if we have the funds to do that. But you definitely want to get it right on the first try as much as you possibly can.
It's also to add on to Travis's comment there. It's better to ask for something. It's better to ask for something than not ask for it at all.
Mhm.
So if you think we're potentially gonna, need this item in the year, go ahead and put it in there. And then towards the middle of the year or whatever, if that isn't coming true, then you can always move that funding to something else within your grant potentially. And it's better to ask for it better to put it in there than not ask for it at all. And then sometimes you might ask for it and we say it's not allowable.
Mhm.
But it's better to ask than and get told no than I asked for it at all. And then you're like, oh, I didn't know I could charge that.
Yeah.
And maybe you can charge it, just the way you're wording it might need to be changed too.
So I also want to add two more things. The other one thing two more thing I want to say, as a ECBU, I think one of the strengths is like the community engagement and how you build a relationship. Um, if you switching to funding or you starting getting funding, just be mindful of how you is still engage with your other partners. Just because you have funding, um, if you can still tap into those free service or volunteering service that makes your organization go, because I think once you start paying employee, the narrative or the programs, change a little bit. Then you have to have contracts and make sure you follow those practices. That explain exactly what you do, what they're serving, all the stuff they're providing for you. But still don't forget to engage with your community that's giving volunteering services in some extent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's a really good point. I'm going to jump in with one other thing to add on to what Debra was saying, and then I definitely want to make sure if anybody has any questions that we give time and space for that. I'm going to share a slide from the first meeting that we had a couple weeks ago. And so this slide is about the funding timeline. Debra mentioned that put it in your budget, right? Put it in there if you think it's an expense that might be chargeable to the grant and that your program might need. Because what happens is we receive the applications, we score them based on the content of the program and how well thought out the program is and what are the outcomes. And then we select what we think are the best proposals. But there is, after the selection, a consultation and revision period, probably from mid-March or sorry, mid-February to early March, where we will say, we really like your proposal. It's a strong proposal. We do have some questions or some requests that you modify certain things about your plan. It could also be modifications to the budget. We'd say, we'd like to fund you, but we can't fund everything that's in your budget. So we need to take certain things out of there. But if you'd still like to submit a budget for that same amount, and you can use those funds that maybe were uh, that you thought could be used for a certain activity or purchase that we say, well, unfortunately, we can't do that. Maybe those funds can be used someplace else. So there's a period of a couple weeks there where we will work with those applicants that are selected to get everything looking just the way that it needs to be. So just adding that to what Debra said about put it in your budget, put it in your proposal, and let us tell you no if it's something that can't be done for some reason. Now, obviously, within reason, no, you don't have to wonder if we're going to deny your request to lease a Lamborghini or some exotic anything for your program. But if it's related to the services that you're providing, put it in there. Or during the pre-application period, reach out to us and say, hey, this is something we think might go into our proposal. Can you tell us whether that's something that would be allowable or not? And we certainly provide that information as best as we can. So I'm going to stop sharing again. And please, if anybody has any questions for Debra about budgeting, I want to make sure that you have the time to ask that before we change directions and start talking about reporting.
Yeah, I think you can go ahead and get to the reporting. Maybe some question can still come later. But again, as a reminder, we still have those on in-person meetings. We can, maybe if they come around after the reflection. Yeah. You're good to go, Travis.
Okay.
How are you all?
Yeah, thank you, Debra. And I'm going to share my screen. There we go. Okay. So on from the agenda, we've covered the budgeting basics. We've had our Q&R time. So I'm going to talk about reporting. And this is something that is required if you are funded and you submitted your proposal. We like it. We made the decision to fund you. then there are going to be multiple reports throughout your period of providing the programming with core funds that you will need to submit. So I'm going to try to answer fairly quickly for us today how the reporting data is used, what you have to report if you're a subrecipient, meaning an organization that's funded by core, how will that data be captured, when will those reports be due, when will you need to submit those, and then what is the actual format for submitting that information. So those are the 5 questions that I'm going to try to answer for you here. So first, I think it's really important for everybody who is funded to understand, we're not just asking for reports and for data just to show the federal government that we're trying to do our jobs. This is information that is actually used and used in important ways. So ORR is the Office of Refugee Resettlement. That is the federal organization that distributes the majority of the funding that the Kentucky Office for Refugees receives and then distributes to our subrecipients. So they collect data from all of the states to which funds are granted, and they aggregate, meaning they combine all of that data into a single report or into several reports that are then presented to Congress. That's the United States Congress. And Congress uses the data that they receive from that to make decisions about how many refugees can be admitted in upcoming years, to which that's really a presidential decision, but there's budgeting decisions that go into making sure that the State Department, for example, is able to process as many applications and to assist as many refugees as the president has determined that they would like to allow into the United States. So the data is used for that. It's used for funding decisions in terms of this programming, how much money Congress wants to set aside from the federal budget to be given to the states to then be used to fund subrecipients such as ethnic community-based organizations. The data is also used by the Office of Refugee Resettlement to monitor states and replacement designees. Kentucky has a replacement designee, that is Kentucky Office for Refugees. In a lot of other states, these services are provided by a branch of the state government. In Kentucky, it's done by a nonprofit organization. We provide this data to the Office of Refugee Resettlement, the data that we get from our subrecipients, to show that we're awarding the funds to the right kinds of organizations who are providing the right kinds of services, and we're making sure that as many refugees who come to Kentucky as possible receive the services needed to become well-established and self-sufficient and economically well off and thriving. And then finally, ORR uses the data to identify gaps in services and create new programs. RSI, the Refugee School Impact Program, is relatively new in the field of refugee resettlement services. Youth mentoring is relatively new. And now there are several additional new opportunities that ORR has just announced related to refugee minors and some other populations. Because they've collected this data, they've been able to identify that there are some refugees who are in the United States for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, who have not adjusted, as well as other refugees who maybe received a higher level of services or more appropriate services for their needs. The data was able to show maybe the reason that some people are not adjusting is because there are not programs for that particular population that they're a part of, such as young adults. So we created new programs for that. So CORE collects this data for pretty much the same reasons, just on a state level rather than on a national level. Much like ORR combines all the information from all of the states into a report that they present to Congress, CORE combines all of the information from all of the different entities that we fund in order to have a clear picture of services throughout the state of Kentucky and throughout the year. We also use that data to make funding decisions. Agencies that consistently provide a high quality of data, as well as are able to demonstrate with data the effectiveness of their programs are certainly more likely to receive funding in future funding cycles because they show that their programs work, and that's who we would like to fund and support. We use data to monitor subrecipients to make sure that the services are effective. And like the Office of Refugee Resettlement, we look at data to try to identify any gaps in services so that we can create funding opportunities to encourage the creation of new programs to reach new populations or provide new services that previously were not funded. So let's talk briefly, this will be a lot quicker, what it is that subrecipients actually have to report. What is the data that they need to collect and report to Kentucky Office for Refugees? So the first one is specific to refugees who previously have not received services in the state of Kentucky, and that is demographic information. We keep a database of people that have been served that has names and date of birth and when people arrived in the United States, when they arrived in Kentucky. And that database is very helpful to the organizations that we fund because they don't have to start from zero every time that they are working with a new client. That information exists for most clients already in our database, and so they can just pull it up when the client comes to receive services. But if it's a new client, then subrecipients do need to provide all that demographic information in our database. And I'll talk a little bit about the database in a couple slides. We also ask and require subrecipients to report everybody who enrolls in and who exits their programs. And this is done in our database. There's a simple way to say, this person was enrolled in employment services and there's not a lot else that needs to happen. And then eventually that person will no longer be receiving services. So somebody at your organization would need to go in and provide the date that that person stopped receiving employment services or childcare services or whatever the service might have been. Additionally, not just the enrollment saying, hey, we're putting this person in a program for employment, but what are the specific services that were provided to that client? Were they given career coaching? Were they given clothing that is appropriate for interviews? Were they given rides to interviews, things of that nature? So what are these actual services and how many of these services were provided within a particular period of time? And then finally, and in some ways, most importantly, the outcomes. So you provided all these services, you've worked with all these clients. What is the result? If it's an employment program, how many people got jobs? Are they full-time jobs or part-time jobs? What is the average starting hourly wage of those jobs? If we have multiple programs doing employment services in one community like Louisville or Lexington, some of our larger communities, and one program is able to say 65% of the people that we work with got jobs, and the other program says, well, only 30% of our clients got jobs, that's significant. But even more than that, what if the group that says 65% of our clients got jobs, but they tell us almost all of those were part-time jobs with a starting hourly wage of $12.75, whereas the other group says, well, only 30% of our clients were able to get jobs, but all of them were full-time jobs, and the average starting wage was $24 an hour, and they had health benefits and other things that that other group didn't have. We look at that kind of information to think about who should be funded and why different programs had different outcomes, and can maybe the program that is really good at getting people jobs, but they're part-time and low-wage jobs, is there something they can learn from this program that was helping people get full-time, high-paying jobs? And same, the one that got full-time, high-paying jobs, can they learn from the other organization how to help more people with job placements? So we have a lot of reporting around outcomes. So I have a statement on there. The services and outcomes identified in the service plan portion of each subrecipient's funding application determines what is reported by the agency. So what I mean there is, with Debra talking about budgeting, I showed the program infrastructure section of the application where you talk about how many staff are going to be needed, what resources, who's going to pay for those resources. Well, just above that, there's a section that's called your service plan, where you say, we're going to provide this service to this many clients, and we're hoping that this many of them experience a particular outcome. And when that happens, we know that they're ready for the next step in our program. So in your service plan, you're saying how many people you intend to serve, how many you anticipate will enroll, how many you anticipate will complete certain outcomes successfully. Those parts of your service plan are what we are going to ask about with your reporting as outcomes. Did you provide services to as many people as you thought that you would? Did they experience as many positive outcomes as you anticipated? Questions like that. So let's talk about how this data is actually captured. So CORE pays for and maintains a database that's called Client Track. This is a statewide database. It is web-based, and it does take some training, but it is very user-friendly. It takes some time to learn the particular path of questions or data that you might need in order to complete providing this information that we're asking for. But because we use a single statewide database, as I had alluded to earlier, it eases the burden on agencies, because in most cases, the clients that you will serve will already be in the database, because when they first arrived in Kentucky, they connected with a resettlement agency who collected their basic information, who put their eligibility documentation in the database, who provided a summary of the services that they've already provided to that family. When you are working on a core funded grant, you have access to that information. Now, it's important, I think, to say there are partitions or walls in that information. So just by being a core funded organization, that does not mean you have access to all of the information about all of the clients that have ever been served. You would only have access, and all of this is true for all of the organizations that we fund, you would only have access to the information for the clients that you serve, and any organization that you choose to share that information with on a memorandum of understanding basis. So perhaps you want, if you're in Bowling Green, maybe you want to share your information with International Center, and International Center is willing to share their information with you for a specific program like employment. Why would that happen? Why would that be beneficial? Well, if a client is coming to you for employment services, it would be good to know, are they already enrolled in employment services at the International Center? And if they are, am I just going to be providing a copy of the same services with my program? Well, that wouldn't make sense. So sharing that information allows you to make good decisions about who you serve and what kinds of services you'll provide to them. But to get back to reporting, and so we will provide onboarding training for any newly funded organizations, as well as ongoing training around how to use the client track database, what information needs to be put in there. A big component of this is the family self-sufficiency plan. Every participant who is receiving services, I should say every participant who is receiving employment services, has to have a family self-sufficiency plan. And if you're selected for funding, we'll spend a lot more time talking about that. But that plan is a little bit more detailed. It does require a little bit more work and cooperation amongst agencies within a community if there is a family that is receiving services from multiple organizations. So we just have to be careful about who reports the data and how it gets reported, so that we're not counting the same information multiple times if a client's being served by multiple organizations. So that's the database that we use, and just kind of a overview of that. There is a section within the database for running reports, and this is how you would actually provide most of the information to Kentucky Office for Refugees. You can run custom reports. We'll teach you how to set those up. You can look for services that you provided within a certain time frame. Maybe you only want to see who received services in the last month. Or you can look at demographic information about the people that you've served. Maybe you're thinking, it feels like we're not reaching a certain population that we intended to reach with this program. Well, you can run a report. Setting it up and running it takes anywhere from 5 minutes if you're very familiar with the system, to maybe 25 minutes if you're newer. And you can very quickly find out, does the data show you that your hunch is correct? It looks like we're not serving maybe people of a specific nationality that we thought that we could reach, or people in a certain age group, or people that have been in the United States for less than 5 years, or less than 3 years, or who have just arrived within the last year. So reporting in ClientTrack is a very rich tool that you would learn how to use if you're funded. But it's also important because that is a key way that you would provide information to Kentucky Office for Refugees. We would ask, how many people receive services? Well, you can run a report that will tell you that. You don't have to, pen and paper, keep a tally of everybody that you provide services to or anything like that. Okay. When are reports due? This is really important to understand. So ORR mandates something called a semi-annual report, meaning a report that happens twice a year. They always happen at the same time. There is a federal schedule for this. CORE cannot change these timeframes. And I say that like it's a bad thing. It's not. It just will be a little bit confusing for agencies that are funded to start their programs beginning on April 1st. So let me explain that. The semi-annual report 1, which is what ORR calls it, is due at the end of April. So most organizations, including CORE, are funded from October 1st through September 30th of the following year. So the end of March, March 31st, marks the halfway point in the year. So they say from March 31st to the end of April, you've got 1 month to do a report about all of the services and all of the clients that you served in the first 6 months. And that's called report 1. Well, if you recall, our intention is to not fund people starting on October 1st, but to fund them starting on April 1st. So they actually would not, if you're awarded this coming year, we tell you in March, hey, we're going to give you an award. Your program can start on April 1st. You can start charging things to CORE on April 1st. You would not complete the semi-annual report 1 because you wouldn't have any data to report at that time. Semi-annual report 2 is actually a full year report from October 1st through September 30th. Well, again, if we just started funding an organization April 1st, they're only going to have 6 months of data, and it would be the first report that they would be completing. The ORR calls it the semi-annual report 2. So even though it would be the very first report that you would be completing in October of 2025, it's called report 2. So there's a little confusion there, but the main thing to know is the big reports happen twice a year, in April and in October. And there are specific templates that I'll share a little bit of here in just a minute, what that looks like and how that happens. The other report that funded agencies have to do is a closeout or a final report that's due up to 60 days following the end of your award period of performance. And so that would be, we will fund initially for 18 months, a year and a half, and we might renew, as we discussed last week, for an additional 18 months if the project is going well and if your organization says we'd like to continue doing this. So your final report would be a look back on either the 18 months or the full 3 years that your program was in operation. You could then do a competitive application at the end of 3 years to actually continue your program, but we would still consider it a closeout at the end of 3 years. Okay, how is the data reported to Kentucky Office for Refugees? So we provide the templates to the organization. There's a data template and there is a narrative report template that we would give to agencies that are funded. So in Client Track, you run reports and you summarize that data, how many people were enrolled, how many people have exited, how many of different kinds of services were provided, for example. Let's go ahead and I'm going to share briefly a sample data report. There we go. So this is a template that we use for the English language training providers. So if you were funded to provide English language training, you would be filling out a data report similar to this one. It's not very long. That's the full report there. The more types of services your agency is providing, the more of these different kinds of data reports you might have to do. So if you're doing an employment program with an English language training component and a case management component, well, that would be 3 different data reports similar to this one, but they might have different questions. So this is just one example. But you can see the first question is, how many previous English language training recipients were still enrolled in this reporting period? So this reporting period is October 1st to March 31st. Maybe this organization has been serving clients already for a year prior to that. So this question is just saying, on October 1st, how many people were already in your program because they had been in your program before October 1st? Second question is, of the people that you're serving, how many of them are new arrivals in the United States? How many of them are secondary migrants, meaning they lived in another state and then they moved to Kentucky and started receiving services here? That's information that would be in Client Track. Number 3, the total number of recipients that you served during this reporting period. Number 4, how many of them exited or were terminated during this reporting period, and so on. So you can see the kind of data that I've been talking about is what is reflected on this report. Because it's English language training, there's a question about how many people took one of these assessments, the CASAS assessment or the TABE test, to show their progress in their English language acquisition. And then there's some performance outcomes questions. How many people showed improvement in reading and listening and speaking, which are the different elements of the English language training program? For case management, for employment services, of course, these questions would be a little bit different, but this is a data report. So all you're putting on here are the numbers. There were 31 people still in the program at the beginning of this report period from the previous period. The new people, we added 20 people who are new to the United States and 4 people who came from another state and then established residency in Kentucky. But you can see it's adding these numbers up for me. 24 is the new folks. 55 is the total of people who were in the program to begin with and the new folks we started serving. And then maybe 18 people stopped receiving services at some point during the past 6 months, and it totals that up for me. So that's what the data report template looks like. And I'm going to briefly share the narrative report template with you. This one is quite a bit longer. It's a little bit more involved, but because it's a narrative report, it's a different kind of way of thinking about your program. So this is just a header, some basic information, who's completing this report. I'm not going to go over all of these, but just give you kind of a sample. So activities, again, if we're talking about an English language training program, we just ask you to describe what activities were offered during this report period. And so this person said, we offered English language classes 3 days a week in the morning and evening with 3 different levels. So they had pre-literate morning classes, beginner morning classes, and intermediate and advanced morning classes, and how many people participated in those. So they said the average attendance for classes. So they're just summarizing their activities here. We asked that you describe what was accomplished and maybe what were some new initiatives that you took on within the last 6 months. So again, this is just paragraph style, sentence style, explaining to us what's been going on with your program, telling us about your successes. Then challenges and emerging issues. What barriers did you face? Maybe, as we talked about last week, you anticipated that you were going to enroll 50 people in your program, but for whatever reason, your recruiting hasn't produced 50 people who were able to sign up. Right now, you only have 20, and you thought you'd already have 45 at this point. So one challenge you would talk about is recruiting, and what it is that you're doing to address those challenges. Emerging issues just means things that you can kind of see might become a problem in the future. Maybe you know that an organization that you partner with is getting ready to stop the program that you were working with, or they're going to close their doors altogether. That's something that would be an emerging issue that hasn't affected your organization yet, but you know that it might in the near future. Any changes that you've made to how you implement your program, reflecting on the data. This isn't just reporting the data, but saying, based on what you reported, how are things looking? Do you feel like you're exceeding your goals or not meeting your goals? What are some of the reasons why that might be? Things of that nature. And then your specific performance measures. Again, this comes right from the service plan that you submit with your application. This person said, we anticipated that we were going to serve, or they did serve 31. Well, okay, let me look at it. 75% of so their goal was 75% of pre-literate students show improvement in their reading ability during this report period. Well, they were able to say that 27 out of 31 did that. Is that 25% or 75% rather? It looks like yes, it is. So they're just reporting their progress on each of the different goals and services that they identified in their service plan. How are things coming so far? And then finally, there's some questions just about operating your program, your spending, are you on track with your spending? Are there vacant positions? Things of that nature. So let me go back to my PowerPoint, and I'm almost done here, and we're going to have some time for questions. So the main thing here to understand is if you pursue funding with us, we're going to partner with you to help you do these things. But definitely the budgeting is a pretty significant undertaking, and the commitment to putting data in the database and reporting twice a year on all of the services and enrollments and those kinds of things, the challenges you're facing, the successes that you've had. It's hugely important that with your application, that you're committing to doing all of that, not just to provide the services to the clients, which is the most important thing, but not doing the data reports well or not submitting them timely is something that could cause us to reconsider funding in the future. So let's go ahead and stop there. And looks like there might be, there's a request for a phone number. Yes, we can get that to you for questions that you have, certainly. Anybody else have questions about budgeting, reporting, any of the things that we have talked about today?
Yes, I have a quick question regarding the reporting.
Okay.
When it comes to when you're with the client track, there's a session where the only way to test is by observation. How can you report that?
Okay, I was adjusting my volume and I missed the first part of your question. Joy, would you mind repeating that for me?
It says some reporting can be based on observation. How would you report observation ways of reporting?
Yeah, so that would most likely be in the narrative part of the report. You might have to give me some examples for me to answer that better. But one thing that we will do if you're funded is give you a sample of of the things that you will need to report in the data report. And we'll help you to make sure that you know how to put that into client track, such as the enrollments and the services and things of that nature. The other things that are observations, again, it would depend on the type of observation, how that would be reported, but probably just in the narrative section. And there is at the end, I didn't get to it, but there's space for just other things that you want to include, and there's space, especially for client success stories, telling us about particular clients who have been especially successful in your programs. But Joy, if you have any maybe specific examples of like an observation that you would want to report, I might be able to do a better job of saying how that would happen.
Like a quick example, when you are helping, especially the elderly people, how like to better live for like a nutrition or a matter of health things. So for them, you just they understand what you're telling them, especially because you're using their mother tongue, their language, and you are using the example of the things back then what they understand well. But you also can't, ask them to do even a simple evaluation, like, hey, what do you say? How did you, just by raising hands maybe, or but they don't, there's no really a proper way to say like this is what they get. You just
Okay,
check by
sure.
their faces. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So in client track, if you feel like it's something to be reported there, everybody will have access to, I believe everybody would have access to case notes, to be able to write observations about particular clients and situations there. If it's client specific, I would put it there. If it's more general or population level observations, those definitely would go in the narrative report. Um, some of those kinds of observations are things that you would not necessarily want to wait until the end of the 6-month period to share with core, right? If it's something that would impact the well-being of clients or would impact the effectiveness of your program, you would want to reach out to us right away and say, hey, here's some things that we see happening, um, and explain maybe this is how we think it's going to impact either our program's effectiveness or it's going to impact our clients. And so we would have a conversation about that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else have a question? Okay, Lisa, go ahead.
Yeah, I will try to catch up, but I didn't get in on time. The the first link that I had didn't allow me to get in, so I had to come up to look the previous email from Mr. Sedrick to find another one. So my question is, sometimes when reporting, we can find some challenges like we we've made a goal to reach like 20 people um, for any program that we're providing. And maybe, like you said, maybe the one, let me come with this question, maybe we are providing some training and we say, okay, we will enroll like 20 people by August. But when trying to recruit people, we found that they have some challenge that we need to address before they get enrolled in the program. So how can we report the challenge? Because sometimes, for instance, I need to enroll some people in nursing program, but I find that people are interested in, but the level of English is like beginning level. They can't understand well, they can't listen well or speak well when get training. So how can we like tell like success or not success, but how can we report that challenge?
Okay, so that's a good question. I'm looking at a document here to see if there's a space for something that I was hoping was on here and it's not. But okay. When you submit a proposal, just as an example, as a kind of way to answer that question, right, maybe your proposal has to do with employment services and specifically preparing people for jobs in a particular field of work, right? And they're encountering challenges that are outside of the proposal that you originally submitted, that would prevent your program from being effective. So the first thing, of course, is as you're preparing your proposal, you want to think broadly about all the different barriers and challenges and things that could go wrong on an individual basis from client to client or participant to participant, as well as on a population or community basis, as well as at an agency level thing, right? Like if you were counting on a particular staff member or volunteer and circumstances changed, they're no longer involved in the project, but they had special skills that made them uniquely able to do something. So you anticipate as much as you can and you write that into your plan and say, if this barrier does come up, here's how we plan to address it. And here's the resources we would need to be able to do that. But you can't anticipate everything. So there is a process called a service plan amendment, as well as a budget amendment. You would basically reach out to CORE and say, as my plan was written and as it was funded, the contract that we have, it seems like we've encountered some things that we don't have the ability to solve or address because it wasn't part of the plan. Can we modify our plan? Well, first of all, do we need to modify our plan to provide these other services to help people overcome these other barriers that we didn't anticipate? But if we do need to modify our plan, what does that look like? Well, typically it just means taking the service plan that you already submitted or your application and adding an additional paragraph in certain sections or additional lines in there to say, in addition to everything that we already said we wanted to do, we'd like to also do this. Or instead of doing this thing that we anticipated, we would like to do something else. And of course, it's easier to approve changes like that if they fit within the budget that was already submitted. But in some cases, they don't, right? And you might have to ask for either being allowed to move funds from one particular purpose to a different one or to request additional funds. We take those kinds of things on a case-by-case basis. But basically, nobody is perfect at forecasting what might happen in the future, again, on an individual level, a community level, an agency level. So CORE recognizes, and I recognize, just like you do, the need for flexibility. So it's either putting as much flexibility into the plan as you can from the outset, or reaching out and saying, how do we incorporate this flexibility into our plan? How do we change it so that we can do something that is new or different from what we originally intended? I do see another hand up, but before we move to Amina, Isa, did that answer your question okay?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Amina.
Yes, I had a question, but I think you may have touched on it.
That's okay.
I wanted to ask, for example, a specific area of town does lack a lot of the resources that, incoming individuals would need to utilize. And some of what is offered, they have barriers, like not knowing the language and, not being comfortable in the spaces that it is offered. For example, West Louisville, a lot of the resources that are offered, like even with the Opportunity Center, it's not at a capacity where someone who is coming into, West Louisville is going to feel comfortable and I'm going to go to the Opportunity Center, especially if, the atmosphere as much so of you should already be caught up. You should already know everything. I'm asking if we do a proposal, would that be something we could utilize, or is that more so of, oh, it's already offered, try working with that organization, or what would that look like?
Great question. Let me share the funding opportunity application on here. So I believe maybe it's in the vision statement section. Plan. Oh, okay, yeah, here it is right here. So this is in the first section, the problem statement, where you're saying, hey, this is what's going on. This is the hardship, the need that we've identified, right? And so we ask you, what is that hardship? Who is it that's being affected by that? How many people, like what's the scale of this particular need? And then, what are the causes of that? How are people experiencing this hardship? What is the consequence or the impact? And then this next section is, are other organizations in the community working to address this hardship? If not, how has this been confirmed? So did you do your research and you said, yep, it looks like there's just simply nobody else who's doing what we're doing? If so, who are the other organizations and why are you proposing to intervene in the same hardship? Now, I would say in my draft, before I put this together, I had right after that question in parentheses, there are lots of legitimate reasons for providing the same service that somebody else is already providing. You've given several examples. There is a well-observed and well-documented discomfort for people to access services in that particular place. Maybe that is not accessible. Now, Opportunity Center is on a bus line, but there's lots of other service providers that are not conveniently located to a bus line. And so transportation is a major barrier. Just being able to identify, yes, somebody else is doing this, but we feel the need to do it as well because of cultural differences or transportation barriers, whatever the reason may be, that, we would look at that and say, okay, I mean, it does look like other people are doing it and maybe just partnering with them would be the best approach. But if you can explain clearly why there's a need to duplicate those services, then I don't think that would be a barrier to us being able to fund an application like that. And so, Amina, does that answer your question okay?
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Maybe, Travis, I want to stress on the question of, I think it was Isa. What happens if, I thought I was going to go in this direction, just for sake of everybody. What if on the proposal and, you say we are recruiting 50 people that are going to go through this training?
Yeah.
And you've already done your assessment. You've identified actually even many people in the community that need that service. But during the actual program start, you only find 30 or 25. How does that work when it comes to reporting related stuff?
Yeah. So the main thing is being able to provide. So you're going to report, hey, our goal was, like we saw on that ELT, 75% of people are going to show improvement. The reality is only 50% have, or we've only been able to enroll half as many people as we thought we would. That's fine. You're just going to report what actually happened, and you're going to provide an explanation why you think that is and what you anticipate doing about it. So is it just that people weren't aware of your program, and so your plan is to advertise more aggressively, which again, that might require an adjustment in your budget and your plan, because maybe advertising in the local paper or with the local news station was not part of your plan for outreach, right? So you would have to communicate with us for something like that. But the only reason that we would look at a funded program and organization and say, this is unacceptable, we're going to pull the plug, would be obviously like criminal behavior. You know, if we get into it and find that an organization is, you know, just completely unable to correctly document expenditures and things like that, where it basically it creates a lot of risk for core, because we provide the funding to you with the understanding that you'll be able to deliver those services in a way that is compliant with federal regulations. If you don't, and you're unable to pay back the monies for some reason, core has to pay back those monies to the federal government. And we're part of Catholic Charities. So that means Catholic Charities has to pay back those monies. So it's really only if there is something that presents that kind of a risk, or say you said you were going to, you know, like Sedrick said, we were going to provide these services to 50 people. And after 6 months, you're at 5. And, you know, we would definitely have a conversation, say, what's going on? Have you tried everything? Is there anything else you can think of? And you're like, nope, I think 5 is it. Even then, we probably wouldn't pull the plug, but we might say, we're going to reduce your budget to make it proportional to the level of services that you are going to be able to provide. But it would happen in dialogue. It would happen in conversation. We would never just be like, surprise, we're not continuing this project anymore, and you're going to have to let staff go, and you're going to have to tell clients they're on their own. We would never do that. So I think it just is, it's a conversation. You report, we're not achieving what we thought we would. Here's what we're doing to try to do better. Here's the reasons why we think it's not happening, those kinds of things. And again, it's just a conversation.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Isa, do you have another question?
Yeah, I have another question, but it's like it gives some answer. But let me ask you this one. Travis, I don't know if it is possible that someone can make like a project and propose to you, because sometimes we see something that our community need, but there is no providers here, like any services available here, or any no profit or any government like institution that provide the service. So should we like make a proposal and send to you, or we have other way to like to seek for funding?
Yeah. Okay. So in the past, there have been a few times where organizations have approached Kentucky Office for Refugees with a proposal and have been able to get funding. We are intentionally not doing that going forward, for the simple reason that organizations got funding and it wasn't competitive. They came and they had a great proposal, they blew us away, and the decision was made to fund that proposal. But other people in the community who might have had a similarly awesome proposal never had the same opportunity for whatever reason to get funded. So we are moving to doing our funding strictly on a notice of funding opportunity basis, meaning we're going to post an announcement saying that funding is available for a project of this sort, you know, employment, you know, whatever, I mean, mental health, youth mentoring, whatever kind of project. And then we will ask agencies who are interested in providing those services to submit their applications. Now, with that said, that does mean you wouldn't be able to just come to us with your proposal and get it funded. What you can do is come to us with a proposal to demonstrate that this is an area where CORE needs to provide a funding opportunity. I think that is totally legitimate. And I would say that in the past, that's what should have happened. Somebody approached us with a great idea for, I'm going to pick something that nobody's actually doing, but they specifically want to do an intensive program for single moms to learn skills in a particular kind of craftsmanship and to set them up to be a small business. There are programs like this, and CORE works with partners who do things like this, but I don't think we directly fund a program like that. So if somebody came to us and said, you know, there are so many single moms, or maybe not single, there's just so many women out there who will not be able to access the traditional job marketplace for whatever reason, but we have people with the skills to teach them how to make some kinds of crafts or materials or clothing or whatever, as well as to teach them business skills and help them set up a business. We would say, that's awesome. There's a need for that. Thank you for bringing the proposal. We need to have a funding opportunity announcement in the near future to say, hey, everybody who thinks that you can provide employment services to women who cannot access traditional workplaces, submit your proposals, right? We would get that proposal that maybe you approached us with, as well as other proposals that might have different ideas about how best to address the issue of women who cannot access traditional employment. So that's what happens. Hopefully going forward is we hear awesome ideas. We do turn them into funding opportunities, but we don't specifically fund the person who came to us unless their proposal is one of the strongest proposals in that notice of funding opportunity. And that's just part of our needing to be more fair and more equitable. We fund some great programs that I don't want to discontinue funding. I think they're great. We should continue funding them. But in some ways, the only reason they got funded is because they were based in Louisville and they had face-to-face access and firsthand knowledge of somebody who works at CORE. That's not how it should work. That's not fair to people in Bowling Green and Covington and Lexington who have great ideas to serve their community that they just didn't have the same level of access. So answered your question, provided a whole lot of other information, but that's essentially how we're approaching this going forward, is making it as fair and as open for everybody as we can.
Yes, I have a question.
Sure.
Yeah, I need to ask on the proposal according to employment services or employment program. So does an organization needed to give the number by yearly or monthly for the proposal that they think like they need to save people? So the number will be yearly or monthly, the number of people they expected to save in the community?
Yeah, when you create your proposal, you will tell us how many people you are prepared to serve. And that will depend on the size of your team. That will depend on the size of your community, the number of people who need the kind of service you're wanting to provide. It's easier on CORE, and so there is some advantage to people who are able to submit proposals for larger numbers, because we don't have to monitor as many organizations, write as many contracts, do all those kinds of things. But we're engaging with ECBO specifically because we recognize that smaller, newer organizations are deeply connected to the communities they serve, unlike perhaps some of the other organizations that we traditionally fund. So you can submit a proposal for 25 people to be served with some project that you have, and it wouldn't be a monthly amount. It would be your numbers that you submit would be for the total length of the project, which would be 18 months. So maybe you say, 18 times 3 is like 54 or something like that. Maybe you say 54 people over the course of 18 months. We're going to start serving an average of 6 per month, and then we're going to stop taking new people after a year, and just continue to serve them until the end of the 18 months. Or maybe your proposal is we're going to serve 500 people every year or every 6 months. As long as it's scaled proportionally to your organization, to your team, and to your budget, we would consider it. So there's not a certain number that you need to reach to be considered.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I just want to remind you that we are getting close to time. I saw Spacious. I don't know, Space, if you have a question or you wanted to say something. And then maybe we can follow up with that because we are getting close to time. Thank you.
Thank you, Sedrick. My question is this: do we have? Does CORE have any specific staff that can help an organization when the organization is stuck with reporting? Is there any person that CORE has specifically to help in that reporting process?
With the reporting?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
With the reporting.
That's a good question. So one of the teams that we do not yet have, but we have written the job descriptions and we're posting jobs, is a monitoring and evaluation team whose job it will be to work with organizations on, here are the requirements, how are you collecting and sharing data with us. And on that team in particular, there will be a data analyst whose job it is to know client track inside and out, how to get information in there, how to set up and run reports. They can help you set up and run reports. I say that they will be able to do that once we have that person here. In the meantime, the program specialists for each of the different funding areas, such as refugee school impact, refugee health promotion, youth mentoring, employment, should be able to answer those questions at a pretty high level as well, and be able to help you with setting up reports and thinking through how to gather that data throughout the operation of your program. But the data analysts, once we have them on, will really be the specialist who would be most capable of answering that question or helping with that type of request.
The other question is just an idea that if you can have one core staff in each city, like let's say Bowling Green, there is one staff that representing core, or Lexington or Ruvo. That can be very easy for the CCs. But like driving to Ruvo to in your office from Owensboro, from Bowling Green, it can be a challenge that for people who don't have transportation.
Yeah.
Just an idea.
Yeah. 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 So you're right. We're not geographically spread out. We're all in Louisville. We do have one employee who lives in Bowling Green and commutes here 2 days a week. But the way that we've decided to set up our team is to have people who specialize based on the type of grant and funding, rather than specializing in a particular geographic area. And that's largely because if we had somebody who would be geographically based in Bowling Green and Owensboro, for example, they would need to have an understanding of RSS, RSI, RHP, and I know these are all just letters, but these are all different major federal programs, Afghan funding, Ukrainian funding. There's too much, it's too broad of a range of knowledge for us to approach it in a geographic way. We really do depend on our specialists really knowing their stuff inside and out, and being specialists for the particular fund that they serve on. So I do see that there's another question, or at least statement about another question in the chat. I'm going to share the last slide. Sedrick, can you maybe talk about the in-person training? Do we have any more information other than the dates that we can share with people? And
nope.
Then what I sorry, before you do that, I'm going to leave the recording on for this part. Then I'm going to stop the recording. I will stick around and answer questions for people, but we'll let everybody else wrap up here. So yeah, go ahead, Sedrick.
Yeah, I mean, I think also based on what Spacey just mentioned, every organization or community might apply to whatever type of grant, and communication with coordinators should be really important. And call, Zoom, WhatsApp, those communication can be working regardless of where you are, and they can support you where you are. Now, after this, guys, this is the third training that is ending, and we are hoping to have in person in Lexington August 17th, in Louisville August 24th, and Bowling Green August 31st. These are Saturdays, but I'm happy to work with communities in different states to see what time works better for them, and then those can be changing. So when you look at this and you see maybe there is something that you think it's needed to change, let me know. But starting next week, I will start sending some emails timing based on city, so that if you have any requests on time, dates, and also location, and we need to work on some logistics, and then we can make it happen. I know I have some established communities in different cities that I can connect to have these meetings at, but I still need to circle back one more time to see where I can find the location and people that can help on some few logistics and to make these meetings happen. And beyond that, to remember, we're going to bring some core coordinators in these meetings so that you can also be able to connect with them, which is very important. Core just hired a lot of grant coordinators, and they'll also be good to do a little bit of networking, but also check it up on where these communities are, but also opportunity for you to get a face-to-face connection with these people. I know you've seen Travis a lot, so now it's time to see other people, and then we'll communicate to you once we're getting like a week to the day, who is coming, and the details of the meetings. But also, I will request you guys go back to the session 1, session 2, session 3. When you go back to your community in the next 2 weeks coming, if there's some other questions that are coming in, and just like, because the meeting is not going to be like a training, it's just like a meetup and discussing just like the leftover stuff, and also some other stuff that we might have forgotten, but also opportunity for you to ask as many questions as it is, and you will know already that you start getting into some type of if you're applying for a grant or not, and then we can start getting to that direction as we do this in-person meetings. So just get ready. If any question, let me know, but I'll be sending some bunch of emails based on the city communities, and then we'll go from there. So that's what I have, Travis, so far.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Thank you all so very, very much for taking this time out to learn this information and to help us build this connection with your respective organizations. And I look forward to seeing many of you in person, hopefully in August, as well as other members of Core's team, as Sedrick had said. So thanks again. And like I said, I'll stick around to answer any more questions off of the recording.